Great news! There's a quick way you can save money. Switch to Geico. Geico could help you get great coverage at a great price, and it only takes 15 minutes to see if you could save 15% or more on car insurance. Go to geico.com today and see how much you could save.
This is the Stephen A. Smith Show podcast.
I'm Stephen A.
Dan Graca sitting in for my man Stephen A. right here on the one and only 98.7 ESPN. 800-919-3776 is our telephone number, and we'll take you for the next 2 hours right up until the Michael K. Show coming your way at 3 o'clock Eastern Time. And again, at Dan Graca, Graca is where you can find me on Twitter if you want to weigh in. We'll do a lot of baseball today with the Mets and Yankees, at least for the time being, going in opposite directions. Now, we preface it, of course, by saying that it is very, very early on in the season, but Mets will have a well-earned day off after spoiling the home opener of the Washington Nationals yesterday in D.C. in very impressive fashion. And Nelson Figueroa, who does a great job on SNY, as one of the Mets analysts, will join us coming up at the bottom of the hour to talk about the Amazons and where they stand right now after 6 games in the Mickey Callaway era. And there's a lot not to like, a lot not to like if you are a Mets fan right now because of the way this team is playing so far here in the early going. But we'll start with the Yankees because, look, same thing I think applies to the Mets when you're talking about the Yankees in the other direction, right? Yankees have played 7 games. They're 4-3. You know, they've had their moments where they're ripping the cover off the ball. You know, they all 3 big guys, Stanton, Judge, and Sanchez, went deep the other day in the same game, and you started to feel good about things. And I get it. It's a long season. You're going to have your ups and downs. But last night, they lose a game to the Baltimore Orioles. A game that, all right, you have a 1-0 lead going into the 7th inning, and you think to yourself, all right, Tanaka's cruising, you're in good shape. Eventually, you turn things over to the bullpen, which is going to be locked down. An Orioles team, which is very much in an early season struggle, you're going to get out of there with a victory. All's going to be right with the world. But then this thing called baseball happens, right? Things that you can't predict. And then Adam Jones gets a hold of one. And then all of a sudden, it's a 2-1 game. And then the wheels start to fall off. Aaron Boone goes to his bullpen. He does the wise thing, right? He brings in Chad Green, and Chad Green has been lights out. Chad Green's been lights out for 2 years. And then Chad Green has a night where suddenly he falters, and things aren't going the right way for him. And these guys are human. You know, these guys aren't going to go out there and go bing, 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 1, 2, 3 every single time you hand them the baseball. And that's just part of baseball. It's human nature. You're not always going to be on. But when you look to the bullpen and you see them falter, the thing that raises some eyebrows in that sense is when you talk about this area, particularly with the New York Yankees. All right, let's be honest. Going into the season, when you sat down and you broke down the Yankees, what were the strengths going to be that jump right off the page? Number one, they're going to score a ton of runs, right? They're going to hit for power. They're going to hit a ton of home runs. They're going to be very potent offensively. That's almost a given. And you know what? That's still going to happen. Start when they play some games when it's not 30 degrees outside and you don't have sleet and snow and rain and all this garbage like you've had here in the Northeast with the weather to start the season. Once it heats up a little bit, all that stuff is going to sort itself out. It really is. You know, Gary Sanchez is going to get going here, and so will the other guys. It's going to happen. Brett Gardner is eventually going to start going a little bit here when it comes to getting the offense jump-started like he did so well, of course, last year. That will work itself out. But the other avenue of this baseball team that you felt really, really, really good about coming into the season was the bullpen. And make no mistake about it. When you looked at the Yankee bullpen, shoot, I'll tell you right now, I think it's the best in baseball. They haven't pitched like it here in the first week of the season, but on paper, this, I think, still is the best relief unit in all the majors. You know, when you talk about an invaluable weapon, a guy like Chad Green, apart from just the guys in the back end of the bullpen, you know, what Green was able to do for this team, invaluable, right? Chapman, I know he makes you sweat it out sometimes there getting the last few outs, but he's still a dynamic closer. You know, David Robertson has accomplished a lot in this game, despite the fact that he served up the gopher ball there over the weekend against Justin Smoke in Toronto. Betances, you want to see him get going? Well, that was maybe the only silver lining, if you will, in last night's game, is that Betances comes in and has a bing, bing, bing routine 9th inning with 3 strikeouts. keeping the Orioles at bay there. Okay, it's a start. It's baby steps. When is the next time Betances is going to be thrust into a high-pressure situation? I guess we'll have to wait and see. But that, to me, when I take stock of the New York Yankees here in the first week of the season, that's probably the one area of concern that I have, is that I look at the bullpen and I say, this is supposed to be as good a unit as you have in all of baseball, and right now teams are having their way with them. Teams are batting over 500 against the Yankee bullpen with runners in scoring position. And the last time I checked, most times when a reliever is summoned upon to come out of the pen and onto that mound, it's generally to put out fires, right? And when guys are on base and there's traffic on the base paths. So if they're not getting it done in that area, then that's going to lead to a lot of problems. But there's too much talent to be able to just sit there and go through the motions. There's too much talent for them not to perform. So I wouldn't really sweat it right now. And I mean, if you want to look at the starting pitching too, Tanaka, who made one bad pitch there in the seventh inning, other than that, he pitched really well. First two times through this rotation, Tanaka, Luis Severino, those guys have done what you expect 1 and 2 starters to do when you give them the baseball. And he asked them to go out there and perform every 5 days. That is not something that concerns you if you're a Yankee fan. What happens the rest of the way? Let's see how CeCe fares tonight when he takes the mound to see if they can get back into the series against the Baltimore Orioles. The weather's nasty. See, and the thing you got to remember, too, is when the weather is this bad, that's edge pitcher. No hitter wants to go out and perform in this. Nobody does. I mean, we all played baseball growing up, right? And sometimes the early part of the season, it's still raw outside. It's still nasty, very much like you see right now. And you make contact and you get the stingers in the hands. And I don't even care at the major league level. Nobody wants to take part in stuff like that. Nobody does. And the other element that has to factor in a major way, and look, I think Major League Baseball is aware of this. I think the owners are clearly aware of this, but they'd rather take the money. They want to play as many games as possible. You could sit here and talk about shortening the season all you want. Well, let's cut it down to 150, 152. So maybe you don't have to start the season when it's winter-type temperatures outside here in the Northeast. What about the probability of injuries? How about that? What if Giancarlo Stanton or Aaron Judge or anybody else on your favorite team is running around the bases or he's out in the field trying to track down a fly ball or something like that, and he pulls a hamstring, or he slips on some grass and he does something to either his ankle or his knee, and then he's lost for 6-8 weeks. Then what happens? Then the last thing you're going to care about is making sure we play 162 games and making sure we take in all that extra TV money and so on and so forth, because then you're going to be bemoaning the fact that you're without one of your star players for almost 2 months, right? Then all of a sudden it becomes a problem. And you hope it doesn't happen, right? You hope that that's not the case. But in a weird way, it's almost bound to, right? And you just keep your fingers crossed when you're watching either the Mets or the Yankees or whatever team you root for that it's not going to happen to one of our guys, because this isn't baseball weather. This is a joke, right? We talked about it yesterday. They should not be playing baseball in conditions like this. The weather is worse now than it is for the postseason when you're playing into late October and in some cases early November. This is a travesty, but you got to get through it. I mean, the Mets may not play tomorrow because they might get snowed out in D.C. Snowed out, as they're calling for several inches of snow down there. And you know what? If you're a Met fan, you almost wish that they do get snowed out. Who wants to play in that garbage? Really? It just takes something away from it. That's not baseball weather. When you're talking about football, for example, shoot, I like it as cold and raw and nasty as possible. Give me sleet, give me snow, give me wind, give me rain. That's football weather. I loathe watching football in a dome, indoors, retractable roofs. That's not football. That's arena football, right? That's like just throw the ball in the street and put up a bunch of points type football. That's not real football to me. Football's a game for the elements. Baseball's not. Baseball's supposed to be warm. Baseball's supposed to be summer, right? I'd rather have it 90 degrees than 30 degrees when I'm watching a baseball game, whether I'm in person or whether I'm just watching it on TV. It's not the baseball experience. So you hope you just get through this bump here. And again, I wouldn't push the panic button yet if I'm a Yankee fan. There's still a ton of baseball left. The bats are going to get going, as you know, once the weather heats up. And I would be stunned if the bullpen doesn't hold up its end, because there's that much arm talent when you're talking about the relievers that Aaron Boone has. And the starting pitching, for the most part, has been pretty good, right? And I still think, to me, in the long run, that is where I would have the biggest question mark when you're talking about the Yankees. It's, will this starting pitching hold up? You know, Luis Severino, with every game he pitches and, you know, every 6-7 innings it gets tacked on to that arm, it's just more wear and tear thrown onto what he experienced last year, which was the most workload that he's ever absorbed in his baseball career. How does a young pitcher bounce back from that? We talked about that yesterday, right? CC Sabathia is no spring chicken, right? The guy's pitched way more baseball than what he has left in front of him. And you keep your fingers crossed every time he takes the mound and whether or not he's going to come out of that game with any discomfort and so on and so forth. I mean, CC's good probably for at least a couple of trips to the DL over the course of a long season. That's just how it is, right? I mean, he's a veteran pitcher. It's his thing. And then Tanaka, you got the situation with the elbow, which is always something that's going to linger for as long as he's playing Major League Baseball. But so far, so good. And you know that come the middle of the summer, come the trade deadline, if you're Brian Cashman, you're going to be able to go out there and make a move for a starter if need be. And who knows? Maybe even they go out and bring in another reliever. You know, that didn't stop them last year. And who's to say that they won't do the same thing this time around? The more pitching, the better. You can never have too much when it comes to the arms department. No way, no how. So the Yanks will continue tonight out there at the stadium, and if you're going out there, bundle up. I guess that's the best we could say for the Orioles again tonight. As far as the Mets are concerned, you got to be loving life if you're a Met fan. You know, and I know that it's only 6 games. Don't get me wrong. And I know that there's still a ton of baseball left. But as it was unfolding yesterday, while we were on the air, the game in D.C., you had Cespedes going yard. You had Michael Conforto welcoming him back to the lineup, hitting a go-ahead 2-run jack off of Strasburg to give the Mets the lead. You had Jacob deGrom then almost immediately going right back out onto the mound and loading the bases with nobody out, issuing consecutive 4-pitch walks to national hitters. And you're saying, well, now the wheels are going to come off. And then one by one, he gets out of it, showing you the guts, showing you that determination, that even when things are down, he's still going to go out there and battle, which is a trademark of Jacob deGrom. And that is why, and I've said it time and time again, that if I had one game to win for my life out of any of these guys on the Mets staff, I give the ball to Jacob deGrom. Not Noah Syndergaard, no knock on Thor. The guy could throw it 100 miles an hour. That's great. And I'm not saying that he's a bad pitcher. We know that he's outstanding. But for my money, Jacob deGrom is the alpha dog on this staff because we've seen it time and time again. And that was just a small sample. And I know that it's a game in April. And I know that it is still very early in the season. But think about who you did it against. That win yesterday, okay? That win yesterday would not have meant as much if it was, let's say, in Pittsburgh against the Pirates. Hell, it wouldn't even have mattered as much if it was down in Miami or Atlanta or Philadelphia against one of the other teams in your division. But the fact that it was against the Nationals, the fact that it was against that team, which, let's be honest, has a little bit of a cocky streak to them, right? They feel that it's their division, and they should, right? With all the exception of 2015, they have been the team to beat in this National League East. Problem is, when they get to the playoffs, that's where they run into trouble. And that's where they can't seem to figure things out. So for the Mets to go in there and issue a statement very early on that this is going to be a dogfight all season long, that we are healthy, that we are not going to be pushovers this year. And you think back to that game last year, right? In that ballpark. Wasn't it like one of the last days of April? I don't have the exact date in front of me, but it was a Sunday afternoon, late April. It was the game where Syndergaard ended up hurting the lat muscle, which basically ended the Mets season right there. And you remember what happened in that game where the Nationals kind of ran up the score and they put up, I don't know how many, like 19 runs that day or something ridiculous. Anthony Rendon drove in like 10 or 12 runs, something crazy. So think about fast forwarding almost a year later and what you saw yesterday and how it was a complete 180. There were no injuries. Well, there was an injury to Adam Eaton for the Nationals, so that bears watching. But the Mets were healthy. The Mets were doing their thing at the plate. You know, you'd sit here and you talk about the big bashers in the Yankee lineup with Judge and Stanton and Gary Sanchez, and rightfully so, and the type of damage that they can inflict on opposing pitching. How about the Mets? How about the Mets? You know, we talked about this on Loudmouths yesterday on SNY. Jay Bruce, Michael Conforto, Yoenis Cespedes. You mean to tell me that outfield, if it doesn't stay healthy, isn't going to hit their share of home runs? You mean to tell me that those guys all can't surpass at least 30 dingers on the year if they stay in the lineup? That's a good problem to have if you're Mickey Callaway. All three of those guys went deep in the same game. And then Jay Bruce, the exclamation point with the grand slam. And how about you talk bullpens? We're going to sit here and dissect the Yankee bullpen as to what they have not shown you so far. How about what the Met bullpen has shown you? An area that probably gave you a little bit of anxiety going into the season if you were a Met fan. And I couldn't believe this. But what has happened to a guy like Hansel Robles? A guy who every Met fan probably couldn't stand to see his sight on the mound. And then when you found out that Swarzak was going on the disabled list and up comes Robles, the guy's been lights out. The guy's been lights out since getting called up to the bigs again. I mean, Hansel Robles looks like Mariano Rivera circa 1996 for crying out loud. I'm kidding. But Hansel Robles striking out the side, fanning Bryce Harper in yesterday's game. When did we think we would ever see that? Ever. I mean, things couldn't be going any better if you were a Met fan right now. And as I said, a big statement yesterday. A huge statement against that baseball team in the way in which they won that game. You know, if you think back to 2015 when the Mets went to the World Series, they had their moments against the Washington Nationals. They swept them at Citi Field in late July, right after the trade deadline. Remember with the Wilmer Flores dramatic home run in extra innings? And then they roughed up Jordan Zimmerman on that Sunday night game, the ESPN game, where it was home run after home run after home run. I was in the ballpark that night. That was electric. And then they had the series in D.C. there right around the Labor Day holiday where they went down and swept them there. A couple of them had come from behind fashion. And then basically that was all she wrote in the National League East. You know, maybe this series, and it's never too early, right? Maybe this series is going to serve to be one of those watershed moments for this New York Met baseball team. That they began the season, they went down to Washington, and they beat up on the Nationals. And maybe they don't look back. Maybe they don't. I think it's unlikely because there's still a lot of baseball to be played, and the Nationals are a good team. And the Mets are going to have their problems, just like any team does over a long season. But a great opportunity to make an initial statement here when you talk about what this team can do if healthy. And that was always the big if with this Mets team. If healthy, you know that they're talented. If healthy, you know they can compete. But baseball's a war of attrition when you play 162 games. Your depth is going to be questioned. It's going to be tested. And that's why if you're a team like the Yankees, for example, you got all this talent and you got guys in the minor leagues who are ready at a moment's notice if they have to be called up. You know, that's one thing that the Mets are lacking right now as opposed to the Yankees in terms of guys that you can call upon in the minors to be able to just step right up in the big leagues and make something happen. So a well-earned day off if you're the Mets. And if you're the Yankees, it's back to work today. I still got to get used to the schedule early on in the season. Like we were talking about it before the show. I can't warm up to it yet. I get it. You know, every team has to get their home openers in, and they're generally tried to play in those games in the afternoon and whatnot. So you have off days built in just in case you have some bad weather. But think about it. The second week of the baseball season, Mets haven't played either Friday yet. And on Friday, everybody plays in baseball. So we need a little bit more routine than maybe, just maybe, it'll feel like the baseball season. As I said, Nelson Figueroa from SNY will join us coming up, in about 10, 15 minutes or so and talk about what the Mets have done so far here in the early going. Lot to get to with him. We'll also spend some time on the NBA. And, you know, we talked about what the Knicks have to look forward to the last week of the season when scoreboard watching and seeing what some of these other teams are going to do and maybe, just maybe, improve their chances of getting an extra couple of ping pong balls for the NBA lottery. Well, they got help last night. All right? Check one, thanks to the Brooklyn Nets, who go into Milwaukee and beat a Bucks team, which is trying to nail down some playoff positioning in that Eastern Conference. The Nets go bombs away from three, and they beat the Milwaukee Bucks. So the way things stand right now, Knicks and Bulls are knotted at 27 wins. The Nets are just one back with 26 wins. The Nets and the Bulls have to play each other 2 more times before this season is over. If you're a Knicks fan, you hope you get a split at the very least. Let Brooklyn win one. Let the Bulls win one. And then you still have a chance there in the Western Conference with Sacramento, who they got 25 wins. My point being, though, Knicks' spot here in the lottery could move a little bit before all is said and done next week. And I don't think that would necessarily be a bad thing if you're a Knicks fan, given everything that you've experienced so far this year. And I don't know if you had a chance to see it, but how about the latest heroics from LeBron James last night in what he did in rallying the Cavaliers from 17 down with about 7.5 to play in that game last night in beating the Wizards. Tremendous, tremendous performance. And I don't know if the Cavaliers are winning a championship. We talked about it a little bit yesterday. But right now, you got to feel a heck of a lot better about their chances just getting back to the NBA Finals in this Eastern Conference, given everything that's transpired with some of these other teams and the injuries as opposed to before. And when that dude is on a mission and that dude is motivated, there's very little that's going to be able to stand in his way, at least in the Eastern Conference, where nobody has had an answer for him for the last 7 years. Nobody has. So we'll get into some NBA a little bit later on. Also the football, and as the draft turns, which quarterback is going to end up in Florham Park? What are the Giants going to do at number 2? All things that we will throw up for discussion. And a congrats to the New Jersey Devils for punching their ticket to the playoffs. First time since they went to the finals in 2012. There you go. Hearty round of applause for the Devils. John Hines has done a great job. Ray Shiro's done a great job putting this team together. And Taylor Hall, even though he didn't factor into the scoring last night, has had himself an MVP caliber season. And with all that other young talent they have, they are a team that nobody is going to want to play in that Eastern Conference. And you don't know who they're going to play yet because there's still going to be some positioning that needs to get sorted out over the last couple of days of this season. So great job by the Devils, and it'll be interesting to see what they do. Is, let's face it, when you talk about the basketball and the hockey locals, they're going to be the only one that's going to be playing in the postseason. 800-919-3776. Want to pick your brain. Met fans, are you complacent? Are you satisfied? Are you confident? Do you think that the Mets are just going to continue on this warpath the rest of the season? And if you're a Yankee fan, are you worried in any way, even though we're still early in the season? And if so, what is it that concerns you? It's Dan Graca in for Stephen A. We're rolling till 3 o'clock right here on 98.7 ESPN.
Craving even more of Stephen A?
Him of all people.
For around-the-clock access to the man?
I'm Stephen A.
You can follow him on Twitter and Instagram at Stephen A. Smith and on Facebook at Stephen A.
Dan Graca hanging out with you here for Stephen A. 800-919-3776. Don't forget to tweet away at me. Comments, questions, at Dan Graca, Graca. I should have put a poll question up. That's maybe if we have time before the show is over in one of our breaks, I'll throw it up there. But, getting into this whole thing with the Giants, what should they do at number 2? Should they draft a quarterback? Should they draft Eli Manning's successor with that second pick if indeed they stand pat? And we gave you the reasons for doing it. Now, the reasons not for doing it, as I said, if you're going to move forward with Eli, like the plan, go get yourself a player that's going to contribute right away. And you know the usual suspects, whether that's Saquon Barkley, whether that's Bradley Chubb. If you want to go back to beefing up the Giant defense, which has really been their calling card for so long, for so much time, right? I mean, you think about Giant football, you think about defense, right? That was the calling card for so long. And I know that when you think about the 2 Super Bowls that they've won here in this century, right? When you talk about the 2 wins over the Patriots, yeah, they featured, the dramatic offensive plays, which kind of stand out to you. Whether it was the helmet catch with David Tyree, and then later on the game-winning touchdown pass to Plaxico. And then in that second Super Bowl, you had Eli dropping it right into Mario Manningham's breadbasket on that beautiful throw right down the sidelines there. But they're not getting that done without defense and wreaking havoc, especially in those games against Tom Brady and in those Super Bowls, making life miserable for them. And they got to get back to that. JPP is no longer part of this team. All right, Olivier Vernon's a nice player, but is Olivier Vernon a guy that can wreak havoc on the quarterback all by himself? I do not think so, despite the fact that he's getting a nice little paycheck, and it's fun being him going to the bank every week. But I don't know if he is a singular game wrecker that he's being made out to be. Remember, Olivier Vernon had his best years in the NFL when he had Cameron Wake alongside of him there in Miami, who was a damn good player in his own right. And in a couple of years ago with the Giants, they had other guys getting after it. So it was a team effort. You had Snacks Harrison on that line who had an all-pro season. You had JPP there still. So I think that he needs some help. And is Bradley Chubb that guy? Who knows? One thing that the Giants have already said about Chubb, and James Betcher, the new defensive coordinator who spoke to the media a couple of days ago, Chubb is a guy who's versatile enough to where if they're going to use him as a stand-up outside linebacker, he can do that. They're not opposed to him putting his hand in the dirt if they want to show some four-man fronts, and he could play from either side. There's a lot of variety to his game. He's a three-down player. He's that versatile, and if you're taking a guy that high, you better hope that he is. Giants need more guys like that. Because even a couple of years ago, when they won 11 games and they made the playoffs, and that was with Odell Beckham on the team, what got the Giants there? It was called defense. Right? That defense played out of its mind that season, and that's what they have to get back to doing. And then you have Quentin Nelson, the guard from Notre Dame. Quentin Nelson, depending on who you ask, might just be the best player in this draft. No kidding. He is probably the safest pick in this draft. You always hear that, who's the safest pick in the draft? Who's the plug-and-play guy more than anybody else? It might be the guard. But you know what the problem there is, right? A lot of fans sit there and sigh and go, oh, he's a guard. When you have as god-awful a season as the Giants had last year, you really want a guard to show for that, right? I mean, that's one of the perks of being so bad is that you have a high draft pick. And in the Giants' case, it's number 2. You want to take an offensive line. Offensive lineman's boring, isn't it? I mean, who the heck wants to deal with a guard as the person coming into your program? But he's pretty good. I mean, he's really good. You think about what a guy like Zach Martin did when he went to the Dallas Cowboys a couple of years ago, and the immediate impact with Zach Martin and Ezekiel Elliott, and then they were off and running, and they won themselves a division title, and it was just another piece of what became the best offensive line in the NFL. Now, the Giants aren't there yet, and I'm not saying that Quentin Nelson, by drafting him, and with the free agent acquisition of a guy like Nate Solder, I don't think the Giants' offensive line certainly jumps to the head of the class, but we know that it'll be light years ahead of where it was for the last couple of seasons. But Quentin Nelson is a day one starter. And if you think about the National Football League and the way the defenses are designed right now, you can never have enough pass rush. You can never have enough quality defensive linemen, and it doesn't matter, regardless of position. You see teams, the Giants did this back in the day when they had Tuck and Umanure and Strahan. Get them all on the field at the same time. And they moved Tuck on the inside of that D-line, and he wreaked havoc in that Super Bowl against the Pats. Everybody remembers that. You think back to what the Philadelphia Eagles did here just this past season, getting all those guys on the line at the same time. You see the pressure that they were able to bring right up the A-gap and win themselves a Super Bowl. You need some help on the interior of that offensive line. It isn't so much anymore about, let's make sure we fortify the tackle position, because those are the guys who are out on an island, and they're the ones that are going to be held responsible more than anything else. No, you want to go out there and bring in as many dudes as possible to shore up the inside of that line, and that's what a Zach Martin will do for you. Not Zach Martin, excuse me, Quentin Nelson. Zach Martin, we know, is thriving in Dallas, but another former Golden Domer from Notre Dame, I think he would be beneficial. All right? So a Quentin Nelson, a Saquon Barkley, a Bradley Chubb, those are guys you bring in and you plug them in from day one. They help your team in the short term and the long term. The quarterback, he's not doing anything this year for you. Shoot, he might not do anything in 2019. He may not be ready to roll until 2020. So that first-round pick is maybe not someone who is helping your team right off the bat, and maybe the best thing, certainly for a team with an aging quarterback like Eli, who they still very much believe in, will be bringing in a guy with that first-round choice who's not the QB. What do you think? 800-919-3776. Let's get to some phones. Let's say hi to Uzi in Roslyn. Uzi, you're on 98.7. How are you?
Hey, it's actually Uzi.
Uzi. What's up, Uzi?
All right, so listen, I'm actually going a little off topic because I wanted to talk baseball for a minute. But my whole thing about baseball is when you set a lineup up, you're trying to get as many at-bats as you can get. So I don't understand why, with all the analytics going on, they didn't try to maybe do something different. The way I'm thinking is you break your lineup into 3 parts. You have your guy who has a good eye. You have a guy who can be fast and break a double play, and the guy with the power. And then your number 4 hitter is not another power guy. It's another guy who has a good eye, who's going to see a lot of pitches, who's going to get on base. And then your number 3, 6, and 9 hitters would be your power hitters. And your 1, if you get what I'm saying over here. And I think if they went with that way, the lineup would turn over more times because there would be less outs. You don't stagger your worst players and basically give up an inning.
Well, don't you? You've already seen some teams experiment with a little bit of that in terms of the lineup construction here in the early part of the season. The Mets have done it. You know, Mickey Callaway has batted the pitcher in the 8th spot how many times? Because you want to almost have that those 2 leadoff hitters would essentially become your number 9 hitter and then your true leadoff hitter. And then setting up your big bopper in Cespedes at number 2, because that's the other thing that's changed over the years, right, Uzi? That, you know, you look at, you have these sluggers who are now batting in the number 2 hole, and in the past they would usually bat cleanup, or at the very least maybe move them up to 3rd. But, you know, we see what the Yankees are doing with Judge batting in the 2 hole. Stanton batted in the 2 hole with the Marlins. Cespedes is now getting that shot here sometimes with the Mets. You know, the Nationals in their lineup yesterday, Dave Martinez, he had Michael A. Taylor bat 9th. And he had the pitcher batting 8th because you want to roll over the lineup to almost get more guys the opportunity to be on base for when you have your sluggers come up. It's the new way of thinking, right? I mean, it's part of baseball in 2018, and it's a little bit unconventional as opposed to the way it used to be. I get it, and you kind of got to just roll with it. I don't know if I'm necessarily a fan of it, but I can see the logic in doing so. You know, I'm a little bit more of a traditionalist, you know, batting the pitcher 9th, that sort of thing. But, hey, you got to change a little bit, just like the game is. 800-919-3776. Let us say hi to Frank. He is in Union City. Frank, you are on 98.7. How we doing?
Hi, good morning.
What's up, Frank?
None. I was actually just listening in, and I do agree with drafting a quarterback of the future for the New York Giants. However, they did also say they wanted to see what Davis Webb had to offer in the off season. So I agree with the decision, but it's also fair to say let's see what the 3rd round pick has to offer. Is that a fair statement?
It's certainly fair, and I think that the Davis Webb conundrum is something which complicates matters right now when you're talking about investing in that quarterback. Because Frank, I even talked about it yesterday on the show. Think about it. The problem that lies with the Giants with Davis Webb is you got a couple of guys here who are running the program who didn't bring him in. You know, so I don't know when Davis Webb was drafted in 2017, I don't know what Dave Gettleman, who at the time was still running the draft for Carolina, thought of him. I don't know what Pat Shurmur, who at the time was still with the Vikings, thought of Davis Webb. I have no idea. I don't know what their grades were of him. And right now, unfortunately, they don't even have any substantial game film to go back and rely on as to whether they get a true evaluation of this guy. And I don't think that the practice field is going to be able to satisfy that either. You know, whenever off-season program begins in a couple of weeks here and when you have the OTAs, all right, so Davis Webb is going to go out there in shorts and a T-shirt, and he's going to sling the ball all around the practice field there in East Rutherford. I don't think that that's enough time for the Giants to be able to say, oh, yeah, absolutely, this is our guy, this is our keeper. It's basically like the scouting combine, right? It's one thing for a guy to be able to throw the ball, you know, through a brick wall, and it looks like he can make every throw known to man, and he's got great mobility and athleticism. But what happens when you put the pads and the helmet on, and you got the bullets flying at you, and you got guys wanting to rip your head off? Then what do? That's how you get a true gauge of a quarterback, not silly 7-on-7 drills. So they're in a rough spot in that regard. Adam is in Millburn. He's up next. Adam, you're on 98.7. What's going on?
Hey, how are you doing?
Good, Adam. What's up?
So here's what I was thinking. I mean, I think when it comes right down to it, the smartest move for the Giants, and I'm a longtime Giant fan, is to find Eli's successor. I think going forward, you know, I hope they're never in this position again. So hopefully you find the reboot of Eli, and we're good for the next 15 or so years. But the reason I wouldn't do that is if they don't trade Odell, with all his behavior and histrionics, and let's say you bring in Sam Darnold, what's that going to do for that quarterback's development going forward? I mean, I remember when Eli was in his first few years and he looked like a deer in the headlights, and he had Jeremy Shockey and Tiki Barber, who were the focal points from a personality standpoint. Eli didn't become Eli until those two guys were gone, and he won a Super Bowl coincidentally right after that.
Look, I think, unfortunately, you can be a team, and Adam, thank you for the phone call. You have the success stories out there. Aaron Rodgers is one that stands out, right? He was a guy that sat for how many years? Well, let me see, 3 years, right? He was drafted in 2005. He didn't take over until 2008 when Favre became a member of the Jets. And he went and is having a Hall of Fame career. But how do we know that that's not just Aaron Rodgers? Right? Because you could also look at other quarterbacks who sat and watched for a little bit, and when they got a chance to play, wasn't very good. You know, you take a guy like, I can go back to even Chad Pennington. You know, Chad Pennington was drafted in 2000, didn't play in 2000, didn't play in 2001 because they had Testaverde, and then the Jets got off to a horrible start in 2002. You know, they started off 1-3, 1-4, whatever, and then Herman Edwards decided, you know what, let's see what Pennington can do, and then took off from there. But that could be more about the player, more so than just the team, the situation, the program, sitting around watching and learning. Because you could have guys who could sit around and absorb all that there is to absorb, and then when they get a chance to play, it doesn't work out. Like take for example, you know, up in New England. Remember before there was even Jimmy Garoppolo? Remember Belichick drafted Ryan Mallett, the kid from Arkansas? And everybody thought that was going to be an absolute steal because there was going to be no pressure on him. He was going to sit back. He was going to watch Brady. And then maybe, just maybe, he's going to get a chance to play and all was going to be right with the world. Well, Ryan Mallett got an opportunity, and he's had to bounce around from team to team to team because he hasn't been able to stick. And it hasn't been able to work out for him. And turns out he's not that good. And he was a guy who went up there and he sat and watched and learned from Brady and Belichick. And how did that turn out for him? So there's no guarantees. There really isn't. I put a poll question up here so you could check it out on Twitter, at Dan Graca, at ESPN New York 98.7. Should the Giants draft a quarterback with the number 2 pick? So feel free to weigh in on Twitter, and we'll see how we do here at the end of the show. Let's say hi to Corey. Corey, you're in Edison. What's going on?
Hey, thanks for taking the call.
Hey, Corey.
You're talking about earlier about the Giants not picking a quarterback at 2, and as a Jets fan, that makes me ecstatic because if they were to do that, I think Allen would go 1 to Cleveland. I have a suspicion about that. And if the Giants don't pick a quarterback at 2, all of a sudden Jets are looking at Darnold at 3, which I would be ecstatic about as a Jets fan.
Darnold, to me, is the guy that I would rate above the others right now. And if I had my druthers to take one guy, it would still be him. Now, look, that doesn't mean that it's going to turn out to be right, but he's still the guy that I think is maybe a little bit more seasoned and the full package than those other players. And you're right about that. And that's what makes this thing so fascinating, Corey, is that, yes, you have the Giants, and they certainly have an opportunity to take a quarterback and a lot of good reasoning to do so, but there's also that trickle down to the Jets who are one spot below them at 3. And, you know, some people got on the Jets for moving up to 3 without any guarantee of getting the player they want. It's almost like they're picking of who's ever left to them. But I got a sneaky suspicion. And you know, I, for one, have no problem with what they did. No problem. And people thought that they paid too hefty of a sum. Well, they didn't have to give up a future first rounder, which is a step in the right direction, number 1. And you need to have some conviction. You need to have some belief when you go out there and make a move like Mike McCagnon did, and to pay the price that you did, even giving up second-round draft choices and then some. Because when you're talking about a franchise quarterback, a guy who can instantaneously, from the moment he steps on the field and takes over that job, he becomes the face of your franchise. When you do that, there is no sum that's too great to pay, right? There is no price that you're going to absolutely say no to if you truly believe in that player. Now, the predicament the Jets fall into, though, with that is that they're not trading up to 1. You know, they had some conversations, they said, with the Cleveland Browns, but they just didn't feel like maybe necessarily paying an outlandish price. And I guess there are limits to a certain degree. You know, you don't want to give up your entire draft like what Mike Ditka did all those years ago for Ricky Williams, because that was foolish. But I don't even know if I would do that for a quarterback. But in the Jets' case, I don't think it's going to be a situation to where if they like 3 guys and they're maybe going to get left with that third guy, that might not be the reality that they're faced with in a few weeks, because I still don't believe the Giants are going quarterback. I really, really don't. It's one thing to say, should they take a quarterback? Will they is another question altogether. And I don't think they are indeed going to take one. I really don't. So I think the Jets are going to have their options. I think one quarterback will go in the first two. I think the Browns are going in that direction. Giants, I think, are going to look elsewhere. I really, really do. So if you're the Jets, you're Mike McCagnon, you'll have some stuff to play with. 800-919-3776. Alvin calling in Elizabeth. Alvin, you're on 98.7. What's going on?
Hey, what's going on, Dan?
Alvin, what's up?
Hey, listen, I'm sorry to switch the subject because, I have baseball fever now. Baseball just started, so that's all I want to talk about. Real quick, why in the world hasn't the NL League of the Baseball hasn't taken out pitchers batting in the lineup? Why not give DH a chance in the National League to bring more attention, more long balls, less shorter games, and have a more of an exciting game when you come at bat?
Is it more of an exciting game?
Of course it is. I mean, in the National League, look who we got in the American League now. Look at all of these home run hitters, DH players that are hitting bombs, hitting the long ball. And then in the National League, you see the batter coming in either striking out or bunting. First of all, bunting doesn't even exist anymore in baseball. So,
well, whose fault? But Alvin, whose fault is that? Is that a fault? To me, it's a fault of the players, and it's a fault. That's bunting is fundamental. You learn how to bunt in Little League, and you are right about that. Though that it's amazing how many major leaguers right now can't even execute a simple bunt. That's mind-boggling to me. But I'll say this, Alvin, and I thank you for the phone call. I don't agree that it's a more exciting game with the designated hitter. I personally don't. I like the strategic element to it. You can double switch. It's another whole thing you have to think about, too, in the NL as to how you're going to maneuver your pitcher. Should I send up a pinch hitter? How long am I going to use this guy? So on and so. That's another added element of the game that if you're managing the American League, that's not something you have to ever account for. Most managers will probably tell you that it's kind of an extra challenge if you're an NL skipper and you have to deal with the pitcher. The one thing the designated hitter does, though, and I know that the average fan probably doesn't care about this, but if you're looking at it from a players' union point of view, those are extra jobs, right? American League, the designated hitter, that gives you 15 extra jobs. And those guys generally make a nice chunk of change. So if you do have the designated hitter in the NL one day, those are going to be 15 extra gigs that open up. And more money that's going to be able to spend. So that the Players Association will probably advocate for this, and they have been for quite some time. I don't necessarily think you have to go there. I don't mind. See, I'm a little bit more old school. I don't mind the nice pitcher's duel. I don't need to see, 10 home runs leaving the yard on a given afternoon at the ballpark for me to be satisfied and to have enjoyment. There's nothing wrong with a nice 3-2 game, nice 2-1 game where every hit, every run, every guy that gets on base truly matters. I don't mind that stuff. So I'm not going to sit here and stay awake at night and say that they have to implement the designated hitter to the National League. Do I think that in the next 10, 20 years, eventually that's what's going to happen? Unfortunately, I do. I could read the tea leaves. I see the way baseball's headed right now. Balls are leaving the yard at a rate greater than we've ever seen before. This sport, the people that run it, they like offense. They just do. Does the DH provide more offense? Yeah, of course. Naturally. It's a no-brainer.
Craving even more of Stephen A?
Him of all people!
For around-the-clock access to the man?
I'm Stephen A!
You can follow him on Twitter and Instagram at Stephen A. Smith and on Facebook at Stephen A.